The children at Riverside Elementary thought Adele Mitchell was just the quiet custodian who mopped their floors and emptied their trash bins. They had no idea that the soft-spoken European woman pushing a cleaning cart through their hallways had once been one of France's most elite counter-terrorism operatives. For 3 years, she'd hidden her deadly past behind rubber gloves and a janitor's uniform, desperately trying to escape the violence that had shattered her soul. But when 5 masked gunmen stormed into Mrs. Patterson's third-grade classroom on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning, Adele would have to choose between maintaining her carefully constructed peaceful life and unleashing the lethal skills that could save 30 innocent children. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Riverside Elementary School, casting long golden rectangles across the freshly waxed linoleum floors. Adele Mitchell pushed her cleaning cart down the main hallway, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished surface. At 28, she moved with an unusual grace for someone in custodial work, though no one at the school seemed to notice. To them, she was simply the quiet European woman who arrived before dawn and left after dusk, keeping their world clean and orderly. Adele paused outside Mrs. Patterson's third-grade classroom, listening to the cheerful chaos of morning arrival. Children's voices mixed with the rustling of backpacks and the scraping of small chairs against the floor. Through the glass panel in the door, she could see 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez struggling to reach the high coat hooks, her little arms stretched as far as they could go. Without thinking, Adele stepped inside and gently lifted Emma's bright pink jacket to the proper hook. "There you go, little one," she said, in her soft French accent, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Miss Adele," Emma beamed, revealing a gap-toothed smile that made something warm flutter in Adele's chest. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her desk, offering a polite but distant smile. "Morning, Adele. Could you make sure to get behind the reading corner today? The children spilled juice boxes yesterday." "Of course, Mrs. Patterson," Adele replied, already moving toward her cart. She'd learned long ago that teachers saw custodians as invisible helpers, necessary but forgettable. It was exactly what she needed. As she worked, carefully wiping down surfaces and organizing scattered supplies, Adele listened to the morning routine with the trained attention of someone whose life had once depended on cataloging every detail. She knew that Tommy Chen always forgot his lunch money on Tuesdays, that Sarah Williams had developed a slight limp from a playground injury 3 weeks ago, and that the classroom's back door lock had been sticking for over a month despite her 3 maintenance requests. The children paid her little attention, which suited Adele perfectly. They saw her uniform, her cleaning supplies, her quiet demeanor, and their young minds filed her away as part of the school's background machinery. They had no way of knowing that the woman emptying their pencil sharpener shavings had once moved through darkened buildings in Marseille, neutralizing threats with surgical precision. They couldn't imagine that their gentle custodian had spent 5 years with the GIN, France's elite counter-terrorism unit, before a mission in Syria had gone catastrophically wrong. Adele's hands stilled for a moment as an unwelcome memory surfaced. The sound of automatic gunfire echoing through a Damascus school not unlike this one, the weight of a wounded child in her arms, the searing heat of an explosion that had taken 3 members of her team. She forced the images away, focusing instead on the simple, peaceful task of cleaning crayon marks from a desk. Principal Harrison appeared in the doorway, his bulk filling the frame as he surveyed the classroom with his usual air of harried authority. "Mitchell," he called, not bothering to use her first name. "When you're done here, we need you to check the boiler room. Maintenance says there's a leak." "Yes, sir," Adele responded automatically, though she'd already identified and temporarily fixed the leak 2 days ago. She'd learned not to exceed expectations here. Competence was welcomed, but expertise raised questions she couldn't answer. As Harrison left, she caught Mrs. Patterson's eye. Is there anything else you need, ma'am? The teacher glanced around the increasingly organized classroom, then shook her head. No, that's fine. You do good work, Adele. Quietly efficient. Quietly efficient. If only she knew, Adele thought as she gathered her supplies. 3 years ago, quietly efficient had meant infiltrating terrorist cells and preventing international incidents. Now it meant ensuring that glue sticks were properly capped and that crayon boxes were neatly arranged. She'd chosen this life deliberately, trading adrenaline and accolades for anonymity and peace. After what happened in Damascus, after watching her teammates die because she'd made a split-second tactical decision, Adele had hung up her tactical gear and disappeared into the vast machinery of civilian life. Riverside Elementary had offered her exactly what she needed, a place where no one asked questions about her past, where her days were predictable and safe, where the only violence was the occasional playground scuffle over swing sets. Moving through the school's corridors, Adele mentally cataloged the morning's observations. The security guard, Jerry Hawkins, was 20 minutes late again and would spend his first hour catching up on sports news rather than checking the perimeter. The main office secretary, Linda Morrison, had left her desk unlocked with sensitive student files visible. The back exit near the gymnasium showed signs of recent tampering, though she'd reported it twice with no response. These were the habits of someone trained to see threats everywhere, but Adele had learned to channel that vigilance into mundane observations that helped her blend in. She noted everything and acted on nothing that might draw attention to her unusual level of awareness. In the supply closet, she methodically restocked her cart, each item placed with the precision of someone who understood that preparation could mean the difference between life and death. Most custodians might grab supplies haphazardly, but Adele's training had taught her that chaos in small things leads to chaos in large things. As she worked, children's laughter echoed through the walls, a sound that never failed to remind her why she'd chosen this path. These aren't strategic assets or civilian casualties or collateral damage. They are simply children, deserving of safety and innocence and the luxury of believing that the world is fundamentally good. Adele had made her peace with being invisible, with having her capabilities reduced to floor wax and window cleaner. It was a small price to pay for the absence of violence in her life, for nights without nightmares, for the possibility that she might somehow atone for the choices that had cost her teammates their lives. The morning continued its peaceful rhythm, and Adele lost herself in the meditative routine of maintenance work. For 3 years, this had been enough. This quiet existence, this gentle usefulness, this carefully constructed life where her most difficult decision was which cleaning product to use on different surfaces. She had no reason to believe that this Tuesday would be any different from the hundreds that had come before it. By 9:30 a.m., Riverside Elementary had settled into its familiar rhythm. Adele Mitchell moved through the hallways like a ghost, her presence acknowledged but unremarkable. She'd perfected the art of being simultaneously helpful and invisible, a skill that served her well in her current life but would have been unthinkable in her previous career. In the faculty lounge, she overheard conversations that painted a clear picture of how the staff viewed her. While restocking paper towels, she listened to 2 teachers discussing the upcoming emergency drill procedures. "I worry about having enough adult supervision," said Ms. Rodriguez, the 4th grade teacher. 30 children per class, and if something real ever happened. "Well, we can't count on the custodial staff for anything beyond cleaning," replied Mr. Thompson, the gym teacher. "I mean, Adele seems nice enough, but she's barely 5'4" and probably weighs less than some of our 6th graders. In a real emergency, she'd be more liability than help." Adele continued her work, her expression unchanged, though something cold settled in her stomach. If only they knew that her barely 5'4" frame had once moved through combat zones carrying wounded soldiers twice her size, that her slight build had been an advantage when infiltrating spaces where larger operatives couldn't fit. The conversation continued as she worked. "She's foreign, right? French or something?" Ms. Rodriguez asked. I wonder about her background. She never talks about it. Probably just another immigrant looking for steady work, Thompson replied dismissively. The quiet ones usually are. As long as she does her job and doesn't cause problems, I suppose it doesn't matter. Adele's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In her previous life, not causing problems meant preventing international incidents and neutralizing threats that could have destabilized entire regions. Now it meant being dismissed as just another quiet foreign worker grateful for menial employment. Later, during lunch duty, she witnessed similar attitudes from the administrative staff. Principal Harrison was briefing the security guard about new safety protocols when she approached to report the still broken lock on the gymnasium's rear exit. "Principal Harrison," she said softly, "I wanted to follow up on the maintenance request for the back door lock. It's been 3 weeks and it's still not functioning properly." Harrison barely looked up from his paperwork. "Mitchell, I'm sure it's fine. These old buildings have quirky locks. As long as the door closes, it's secure enough. Sir, with respect, the mechanism is compromised. Someone with knowledge of lock systems could bypass it in under 30 seconds, Adele said, then immediately regretted the specificity of her assessment. Security guard Hawkins laughed, a sound without humor. 30 seconds? What are you, some kind of expert on breaking and entering? His tone carried the casual condescension she'd grown accustomed to. "Look, sweetheart, I know you mean well, but security is my department. Stick to the mops and let the professionals handle the real stuff." Adele felt the familiar burn of being diminished, but she'd learned to swallow her expertise. In Damascus, she'd been consulted on building security by commanders and intelligence officers. Here, she was patted on the head and told to stay in her lane. "I just think it would be safer," she began. "Mitchell," Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying the edge of annoyance. "I appreciate your attention to detail, but we have actual security professionals for these concerns. Your job is maintenance, not threat assessment." The dismissal was clear. Adele nodded and retreated, but not before catching the exchange of glances between Harrison and Hawkins. She'd seen that look before. The patronizing amusement of people who couldn't conceive that someone in her position might possess knowledge they lacked. During afternoon classes, she found herself cleaning near the main office when Linda Morrison, the secretary, was training a new volunteer parent on emergency procedures. "Now, in case of a lockdown, we need all adults to help manage the children. Well, all qualified adults, the teachers, obviously, and parent volunteers like yourself. The maintenance staff, well, they're not really trained for crisis management. We'd probably need them to stay out of the way." The volunteer parent, Mrs. Chen, followed Morrison's gaze to Adele. "She seems capable enough, surely an extra pair of hands." "Oh, I'm sure she'd want to help," Morrison said with patronizing kindness. "But you have to understand, emergency situations require specific skills and training. Adele's probably never dealt with anything more dangerous than a spilled paint can. In a real crisis, she'd likely panic or get in the way of people who actually know what they're doing." Adele continued dusting the reception area, her movements steady despite the familiar sting of being underestimated. If they only knew that she'd managed crisis situations involving hostages, explosives, and armed terrorists. If they understood that her panic response had been surgically removed through years of high-stress training and real-world application. But this was the life she'd chosen. After Damascus, after the nightmares and the guilt and the weight of decisions that had cost lives, she'd deliberately sought obscurity. She'd wanted to be small, invisible, unimportant. The problem was that being seen as incapable felt different from choosing to be unknown. The final incident of the day came during dismissal. She was emptying trash cans near the main entrance when she overheard two mothers discussing school safety. "I just think we need more security," one mother said. "Look at what's happening in other schools. We're so vulnerable here." "At least we have that security guard," the other replied. "Though honestly, I'd feel better if we had someone with real training.
someone who could actually protect our children if something happened. The first mother glanced around and lowered her voice. "Did you see that custodian, the foreign woman? She seems nice, but if there was ever a real emergency, what could someone like that do? Hide in a supply closet, probably." Adele finished her task and moved away, but the words followed her. Someone like that. As if her accent, her size, her quiet demeanor automatically disqualified her from being anything more than a potential victim in a crisis situation. That evening, as she locked up her supplies and prepared to leave, Adele reflected on the day's accumulated dismissals. She'd been reduced to a stereotype: the small, quiet foreign woman, grateful for steady work and incapable of handling anything more complex than cleaning supplies. It was exactly what she'd wanted 3 years ago, when she'd fled her old life. But now, surrounded by people who saw her as fundamentally limited, she found herself remembering what it felt like to be valued for her capabilities, to be trusted with responsibilities that mattered. She pushed the thoughts away as she walked to her car. This was her choice. This peaceful, predictable life where her greatest challenge was removing stubborn stains, and her most important decision was which floor cleaner to use. She'd traded expertise for anonymity, capability for peace of mind. As she drove home to her small apartment, Adele reminded herself why she'd made that trade. In her previous life, people had died because of her decisions. Here, the worst thing that could happen was a missed spot on a window, or an overlooked piece of litter. She had no way of knowing that tomorrow those carefully buried skills would mean the difference between life and death for 30 innocent children. The sunny day was ending peacefully, just like the hundreds before it. Adele had every reason to believe that her quiet, limited existence would continue indefinitely. She was wrong.
The next few weeks at Riverside Elementary established a clear pattern that Adele Mitchell had grown to expect but never quite accept. While her technical competence was acknowledged, she remained systematically excluded from anything considered important or requiring real responsibility. The first notable incident occurred during a staff meeting about emergency preparedness. Adele had been cleaning the conference room when Principal Harrison announced that all essential personnel should remain for the discussion. Teachers, administrative staff, and even the part-time nurse stayed. Adele continued gathering her supplies, assuming she was expected to leave. "Mitchell," Harrison called as she reached the door. "You can finish that later. We need the room now." She nodded and quietly exited, but not before hearing the discussion begin with Harrison's assessment. "We need to focus on personnel who can make critical decisions under pressure, our teaching staff, obviously, and our administrative team." Through the glass door, she watched as they discussed lockdown procedures, evacuation routes, and crisis communication protocols, all topics where her expertise could have been invaluable. Instead, she found herself relegated to the hallway, invisible and irrelevant. The pattern repeated during the following week's fire drill evaluation. While teachers and administrators gathered to assess the exercise's effectiveness, Adele was assigned to clean the gymnasium during the debriefing session. She could hear fragments of conversation about timing, coordination, and safety concerns, but her input wasn't solicited or welcomed. Miss Rodriguez later mentioned to a colleague within Adele's earshot, "The drill went well, but I worry about our response time. We need people who can think quickly and take charge. Thank goodness we have strong leadership among the teaching staff." The implicit message was clear. Leadership was not expected from the custodial staff. Even more telling was the incident with the new security cameras. The school district had approved funds for an upgraded surveillance system, and a technical consultant came to assess the building's security needs. Adele watched from across the hallway as the consultant, Principal Harrison, and security guard Hawkins toured the building, discussing sightlines, blind spots, and coverage areas. Having spent years analyzing building security for tactical operations, Adele could see immediately that they were missing several critical vulnerabilities. The main entrance had a visual obstruction that would hide an intruder's approach from certain angles. The cafeteria's multiple exits created monitoring challenges that the proposed camera placement wouldn't address. Most significantly, the administrative wing had a service corridor that provided unsecured access to sensitive areas. After the consultation, she approached Principal Harrison with carefully worded concerns. "Sir, I noticed during the security assessment that there might be some areas that need additional consideration." "Mitchell," Harrison interrupted, his tone patient but firm, "I appreciate your interest, but security planning requires specialized knowledge. The consultant is a professional with years of experience in school safety systems. I'm sure they've considered all the relevant factors." "Of course, sir. I just thought that since I'm in the building at different hours and see how people move through the spaces, your observations about cleaning schedules and maintenance issues are always welcome," Harrison said, effectively dismissing her broader concerns. "But security planning is outside your area of expertise." Adele watched over the following days as the new cameras were installed exactly as recommended, leaving the vulnerabilities she'd identified completely unaddressed. Her frustration was compounded by the knowledge that in her previous career, her security assessments had prevented multiple terrorist infiltrations. The exclusion became even more pointed during the monthly safety committee meetings. These gatherings included teachers, administrators, a parent representative, and even a student council member. But no custodial staff. The meetings were scheduled during Adele's work hours, and she could hear them discussing security protocols, emergency supplies, and crisis management procedures while she cleaned adjacent areas. During one such meeting, she overheard Mrs. Patterson expressing concern about the school's emergency communication system. "What if the main office is compromised during a crisis? How do we coordinate between different areas of the building?" Adele knew that the school's PA system had a backup control panel in the maintenance office, information that would be crucial during an emergency. She also knew about the building's original blueprints, which showed service tunnels and alternate routes that weren't on the standard floor plans. This knowledge came from her obsessive study of the building's layout, a habit left over from her tactical training. After the meeting, she mentioned the backup communication system to Linda Morrison, the secretary.
"Oh, that's interesting," Morrison replied absently. "I'll make sure to mention it to the safety committee. They're the ones who handle that sort of information." The suggestion was noted, but never attributed to Adele in the committee's subsequent discussions. Her knowledge was useful when filtered through appropriate channels, but her direct participation remained unwelcome. Perhaps most frustrating was the incident with the substitute teacher crisis. During a particularly bad flu season, several teachers were absent simultaneously, leaving classes understaffed. Adele possessed teaching credentials from her university years in France and was fluent in 3 languages, skills that could have helped manage the shortage. When she quietly mentioned her background to Principal Harrison, his response was telling. "That's interesting, Mitchell, but our liability insurance requires certified substitutes from approved agencies. Besides, your primary responsibility is maintaining the building. We can't have you distracted from your actual job." The message was unmistakable. Her actual job was narrow and fixed, regardless of what other capabilities she might possess. The exclusion extended to social exclusion as well. Staff birthday celebrations, holiday parties, and informal gatherings consistently failed to include custodial personnel. Adele would arrive to work to find evidence of these events: leftover cake in the faculty lounge, decorations from parties she hadn't known about, group photos posted on the staff bulletin board that showed everyone except her. When she once asked Miss Rodriguez about a birthday celebration she'd missed, the teacher looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, I didn't think. I mean, we usually just invite the teaching staff and administrators. I assumed you wouldn't be interested in that sort of thing." The assumption that she wouldn't be interested became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more she was excluded, the more she appeared aloof and disengaged, which justified further exclusion. Even her suggestions for improving efficiency were filtered through this lens of limited expectations. When she proposed a more effective supply ordering system that could save the school significant money, Harrison's response was to ask her to write up her ideas for Linda Morrison to review. "The administrative staff handles purchasing decisions," he explained, "but we appreciate input from staff who see day-to-day operational challenges." Her ideas were implemented, but credit was given to administrative efficiency improvements, with no mention of their actual source. The cumulative effect of these exclusions was a growing sense of isolation that Adele hadn't anticipated when she chose this quiet life. She'd expected to be invisible, but she hadn't expected invisibility to feel so much like irrelevant. Late at night in her apartment, she found herself remembering briefings where her tactical assessments had shaped entire operations, where her insights had been not just welcomed but crucial. The contrast with her current situation was stark and sometimes overwhelming. But she reminded herself that this was the price of peace. In her previous life, being valued had come with the weight of life-and-death decisions, with the constant pressure of knowing that mistakes could cost lives. Here, being undervalued meant safety, predictability, and the absence of blood on her hands. She had no way of knowing that very soon the school's systematic exclusion of her capabilities would become a critical weakness that would endanger everyone she'd grown to care for. The pattern of exclusion had been established over months of small incidents and quiet dismissals. It would take a crisis of unprecedented magnitude to break it.
While Riverside Elementary staff continued to see Adele Mitchell as simply their quiet custodian, she had been engaged in a completely different kind of preparation that no one suspected or understood. Her days ended officially at 4 p.m., but her real work often began after everyone else had gone home. 3 evenings a week, Adele stayed late under the pretense of deep cleaning projects. In reality, she was conducting detailed security assessments of the building that would have impressed her former GIGN commanders. Using her master keys and unrestricted access, she methodically mapped every entrance, exit, stairwell, and potential choke point. In a locked drawer of her maintenance office desk, hidden beneath mundane supply catalogs, lay hand-drawn floor plans that detailed the building's tactical geography. These weren't the simplified maps posted in hallways for visitors, but comprehensive diagrams showing sightlines, cover positions, and movement corridors. She'd identified 17 different routes between the main office and any classroom, 12 potential defensive positions that could protect civilians, and 8 escape routes that didn't appear on official emergency plans. Her preparation went beyond building knowledge. Twice a week after her official shift, Adele drove to an abandoned warehouse outside town where she maintained her physical conditioning with the same intensity she'd brought to her counter-terrorism training. Using equipment she'd accumulated slowly over 3 years, a pull-up bar, weighted vests, agility markers, she kept her reflexes sharp and her body ready for demands that her current job would never require. Most of her colleagues at Riverside would have been shocked to learn that their diminutive custodian could complete a 40-foot rope climb in under 15 seconds, could maintain target accuracy with improvised weapons at ranges up to 50 meters, or could move silently through a building regardless of lighting conditions. The weapons training presented particular challenges in her civilian life. Unable to maintain access to firearms without raising questions about her background, Adele had adapted by becoming extraordinarily proficient with improvised weapons and tools readily available in her work environment. She knew the stopping power of various cleaning chemicals when weaponized, the tactical applications of common maintenance tools, and how to construct effective barriers from everyday school supplies. In her apartment, she maintained a collection of seemingly innocent items that served dual purposes. Kitchen knives were selected for throwing balance as much as culinary function. Her exercise equipment doubled as training tools for combat scenarios. Even her clothing choices reflected tactical considerations. Shoes that provided silent movement and secure footing, pants with reinforced knees for crawling or kneeling positions, shirts that allowed full range of arm movement. Her most intensive preparation involved scenario planning. Using her detailed knowledge of the school's layout, staff schedules, and student patterns, Adele had mentally rehearsed responses to various crisis situations. Active shooter scenarios, bomb threats, hostage situations, natural disasters. She'd developed contingency plans for all of them, even though she had no official role in emergency response. These scenarios weren't abstract exercises. Adele understood, with the grim certainty of someone who'd seen schools become battlegrounds, that American educational institutions were increasingly vulnerable to targeted violence. Her former colleagues in European counterterrorism had briefed her on the tactical evolution of school attacks, the typical timing and methodology of such incidents, and the critical factors that determined casualty rates. What made her preparation unique was her dual perspective. She understood both the tactical challenges of neutralizing threats and the logistical realities of protecting large numbers of children in a confined space. Her plans accounted for the chaos and panic that would inevitably accompany any crisis, the varying capabilities of teaching staff under extreme stress, and the critical importance of maintaining adult leadership, when children's natural response would be confusion and fear. The emotional weight of this preparation was considerable. Every time she looked at the children in the hallways, Emma Rodriguez with her gap-toothed smile, Tommy Chen with his perpetual forgotten lunch money, Sarah Williams still favoring her injured leg, she saw potential casualties in scenarios that kept her awake at night. Her decision to leave her operational life had been motivated by exhaustion with violence, but her training made it impossible to ignore the vulnerabilities around her. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same staff members who dismissed her as incompetent for anything beyond cleaning were completely unaware that she'd been preparing to protect them and their students with the same methodical intensity she'd once brought to international security operations. Her most challenging preparation involved psychological conditioning. The Adele Mitchell that her colleagues knew, quiet, deferential, almost invisible, was a carefully constructed persona that allowed her to blend into civilian life.
But accessing her operational capabilities would require shedding that persona instantly and completely, transforming from harmless custodian to lethal protector in the space of seconds. She practiced this transformation during her late-night building assessments, moving from her normal, cautious shuffle to the fluid, purposeful movement patterns of her tactical training. The shift was more than physical. It required accessing psychological states and decision-making processes that she deliberately suppressed for 3 years. The most difficult aspect was reconciling her desire for peace with the reality that protecting innocent lives might require her to take others. In Damascus, that moral calculation had become unbearable, contributing to her decision to leave operational work entirely. But surrounded by children whose safety had become her unofficial responsibility, she found herself accepting that some compromises with her conscience might be necessary. Her preparation also included intelligence gathering on local threat patterns. Using public records and news reports, she'd identified individuals in the surrounding area who'd made threats against schools, mapped the response times and capabilities of local law enforcement, and assessed the tactical training level of the school's existing security measures. What she discovered was sobering. Local police response times averaged 8 to 12 minutes, an eternity in an active crisis situation. Security guard Hawkins had no tactical training beyond basic security protocols, and would likely be among the first casualties in any serious incident. The school's lockdown procedures, while well-intentioned, contained several vulnerabilities that could be exploited by anyone with basic knowledge of building systems. All of this preparation had been conducted in complete secrecy, driven by the same instincts that had made her an exceptional counter-terrorism operative. The difference was that now she was preparing to protect people who saw her as irrelevant, using skills that they couldn't imagine she possessed, for scenarios that they hoped would never occur. Adele had no way of knowing that her months of quiet preparation were about to be put to the ultimate test, or that the children and colleagues who dismissed her capabilities would soon depend entirely on the deadly skills she'd been so carefully maintaining in secret. The sunny Tuesday morning when everything changed began like any other, with Adele Mitchell arriving early to prepare for another day of being invisible. She had no idea that by the end of the day, everyone at Riverside Elementary would know exactly who she really was.
As winter settled over Riverside Elementary, Adele Mitchell found herself increasingly isolated from the community she served. What had begun as polite dismissal had evolved into something more troubling: active suspicion about her competence and intentions. The first incident that marked this shift occurred during a routine parent-teacher conference day. Adele was cleaning the hallway outside Mrs. Patterson's classroom when she overheard a conversation that made her stomach clench with familiar dread. "I'm just saying, it's unusual," one parent was telling another in hushed tones. "She's always around, always listening. Have you noticed how she pays attention to everything? It makes me uncomfortable." "You mean the custodian, the foreign woman?" "Yes. Last week, I saw her watching the children during recess from behind the maintenance building. Just watching. And she knows all their names, their routines. Don't custodians usually just clean and leave?" Adele's grip tightened on her mop handle. Her observation of the children during recess had been part of her security assessment. She'd noticed that the playground sightlines created several blind spots where potential threats could approach undetected. Her knowledge of the children's names and routines came from genuine care and professional habit, not sinister intent. But she understood how it looked to parents who didn't know her background or motivations. Her tactical awareness, filtered through civilian eyes, appeared as suspicious surveillance. The whispers began to follow her through the building. During lunch duty, she caught fragments of conversations that painted an increasingly distorted picture of her behavior. "She stays late most nights.
What could she possibly be cleaning that takes so long? I heard she has keys to every room in the building. Shouldn't there be limits on that kind of access? My daughter said she saw the custodian writing in a notebook during recess. Why would she need to take notes? Each observation was technically accurate, but completely misunderstood. Her late hours were indeed spent mapping the building's security vulnerabilities. She did have comprehensive key access, which was standard for custodial staff, but seemed ominous when viewed with suspicion. Her note-taking involved documenting safety hazards and potential improvements, not gathering intentions for nefarious purposes. The situation escalated when Mrs. Chen, Tommy's mother, requested a meeting with Principal Harrison. Adele learned about it only when she overheard Harrison discussing it with Linda Morrison. Mrs. Chen has concerns about our custodial staff. Apparently, several parents have noticed unusual behavior patterns. She's asking whether we've conducted proper background checks. What kind of unusual behavior? Morrison asked. Being too observant, too knowledgeable about school operations. Some parents think it's inappropriate for someone in her position to be so involved in understanding how the school functions. Adele felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's ancient heating system. Her dedication to understanding the environment she was meant to protect was being reframed as inappropriate curiosity. Her professional habits were being pathologized through the lens of suspicion. The background check request led to an uncomfortable meeting with Harrison the following week. Adele sat across from his desk, watching him review documents that she knew would raise more questions than they answered. "Mitchell," he began carefully, "your employment history before coming to Riverside is sparse. 3 years ago, you appeared with excellent references, but very little verifiable work experience. Can you help me understand those gaps?" Adele had prepared for this conversation for 3 years, crafting a cover story that was technically truthful but deliberately incomplete. "I worked in security consulting in Europe, sir. Much of that work was confidential, which limits what I can discuss or document." "Security consulting?" Harrison's eyes rose. "That's quite different from custodial work. What made you change careers so dramatically?" "I wanted a quieter life," Adele replied, which was entirely true. "Less travel, more stability. I found that I enjoyed maintenance work." Harrison studied her for a long moment. "The thing is, Mitchell, some parents have expressed concerns about your level of engagement with school operations. They feel that you show unusual interest in areas outside your job description." "I care about the safety and security of this building and everyone in it," Adele said carefully. "If that seems unusual, I apologize." "It's not about caring," Harrison continued. "It's about boundaries. Parents need to feel comfortable with all our staff, and when someone shows expertise or knowledge that seems inconsistent with their role, it raises questions." The meeting concluded with Harrison's friendly advice that Adele should focus more narrowly on her assigned duties and avoid activities that might be misinterpreted by concerned parents. She was being asked to become less competent, less aware, less prepared, the exact opposite of everything her training had taught her. The isolation deepened when several teachers began keeping their distance. Miss Rodriguez, who had previously been friendly, now offered only curt nods when they passed in the hallways. Mr. Thompson, the gym teacher, actively avoided areas where Adele was working. Even Mrs. Patterson, who had always been polite, seemed uncomfortable during their brief interactions. The change was most painful during the staff's holiday celebration. Adele arrived to work the morning after to find evidence of a party she hadn't been invited to. Decorations still hanging, leftover food in the faculty lounge, photos posted on the bulletin board showing everyone laughing and socializing. When she'd asked Linda Morrison about it, the response had been tellingly awkward. "Oh, it was just a small gathering," Morrison had said, not meeting her eyes. I'm sure we just forgot to mention it." But Adele had seen the elaborate decorations and extensive food preparations. This hadn't been a forgotten invitation, it had been a deliberate exclusion. The isolation became professional as well as social. Her maintenance requests were processed more slowly. Her suggestions for building improvements were acknowledged but never implemented. When she reported the still broken lock on the gymnasium's rear exit for the 5th time, Harrison's response carried an edge of irritation. "Mitchell, I've told you before that we have professionals handling security matters. Your repeated focus on this particular issue is becoming concerning. Perhaps you should concentrate on areas where your input is actually needed." Even her relationship with the children began to change as parents' suspicions filtered down through the school community. Where once she'd been greeted with enthusiastic waves and cheerful "Good morning, Miss Adele's" calls, children now seemed more hesitant around her. Some still smiled, but others had clearly been coached by their parents to maintain distance. The shift was most evident with Emma Rodriguez, the little girl whose jacket Adele had helped hang on the first day of school. Her mother had been one of the parents expressing concerns, and the child's behavior was heartbreaking. Instead of her usual exuberant greetings, Emma now offered only shy nods before quickly hurrying away. Adele understood the parents' protective instincts, but the loss of the children's easy trust felt like another small death of the peaceful life she'd tried to build. The breaking point came during a faculty meeting about school safety protocols. Adele was cleaning the adjoining hallway when she heard her name mentioned in a way that made her blood run cold. "The issue," Principal Harrison was saying, "is that we have an employee whose background and behavior patterns are raising legitimate concerns among our parent community. While we have no evidence of wrongdoing, we also have an individual whose interests and capabilities seem inconsistent with their stated role." "Are you talking about the custodian?" asked a voice I recognized as Mr. Thompson's. "The European woman?" "I'm talking about the need to ensure that all our staff members are appropriately focused on their assigned responsibilities," Harrison replied diplomatically. "We've had concerns raised about excessive interest in security matters, unusual observation patterns, and what some parents interpret as surveillance behavior." "Surveillance behavior?" This from Miss Rodriguez, sounding alarmed. "Watching children too closely? Taking notes during school activities? Staying late with unexplained purposes?" Harrison enumerated. "Again, there may be innocent explanations for all of this, but perception matters in our business." "What are you suggesting?" asked a teacher whose voice she didn't recognize. "I'm suggesting that we may need to consider whether this employee's presence is compatible with maintaining parent confidence and community trust. Sometimes, even good employees can become problematic if their behavior creates uncomfortable situations for the families we serve." The conversation continued, but Adele had heard enough. She was being systematically prepared for dismissal, not because of any failure in her actual job performance, but because her competence in areas beyond her role had made others uncomfortable. That evening, alone in her apartment, Adele sat at her small kitchen table and stared at the resignation letter she'd begun writing.
The summons to Instructor Phillips' office came on a gray Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Ariana had just finished morning physical training, where she deliberately performed at her usual mediocre level, when Morrison's voice boomed across the training yard. "Carter! Report to Instructor Phillips immediately. Full dress uniform." The requirement for full dress uniform meant this was serious. Ariana's stomach tightened as she changed quickly and made her way across the base. Through the office window, she could see Phillips sitting behind his desk with several manila folders spread before him, his expression more stern than usual. "Specialist Carter, reporting as ordered, sir," she announced, standing at rigid attention. Phillips didn't look up immediately, instead continuing to read through what appeared to be her complete service file. When he finally raised his eyes, there was no warmth in them, only the cold assessment of a career military man who'd made a decision. "Carter, sit down. We need to have a conversation about your future in this program." The words carried an ominous weight. Ariana took the indicated seat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap, projecting calm while her mind raced through possible outcomes. "Over the past several weeks," Phillips continued, "multiple instructors have raised concerns about inconsistencies in your performance and background. You demonstrate knowledge of techniques not taught in our curriculum. You show familiarity with tactical concepts beyond your supposed experience level, and you've been observed engaging in unauthorized activities during off-duty hours." Each accusation hit like a physical blow. Ariana had known this moment was coming, but hearing her dedication and preparation reframed as deception and misconduct was worse than she'd anticipated. "Sir, I've never claimed to have formal military training beyond what I've received here," she said carefully. "If I've shown aptitude in certain areas, it's because I've worked hard to prepare myself for military service." Phillips leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. "Preparation is one thing, Carter. What you've displayed goes beyond preparation into the realm of advanced training that takes years to develop. Either you've been dishonest about your background, or you've been receiving unauthorized instruction while stationed here." The accusation was a trap with no good escape. Admitting to unauthorized training would result in disciplinary action. Continuing to deny advanced skills would make her appear deceptive. Either way, her military career was in jeopardy. "Sir, my family has a military background," Ariana said, choosing her words carefully. "I learned some basic techniques from relatives before enlisting. I didn't think it was relevant to mention during recruitment." "Basic techniques?" Phillips opened one of the folders and pulled out what appeared to be instructor observations. Williams noted that she instinctively executed a Krav Maga counterstrike during sparring. Morrison documented your use of tactical terminology not covered in our training materials. Rodriguez reported that she demonstrated advanced knowledge of room clearing procedures. The evidence was damning, compiled over weeks of observation by instructors who'd grown suspicious of her competence. Ariana realized that her careful performance of mediocrity had been undermined by moments of instinctive expertise. Phillips stood and walked to the window, his back to her as he continued speaking. "Here's the problem, Carter. The military requires absolute honesty from its personnel. When soldiers conceal capabilities or training, it raises questions about integrity, about what else they might be hiding. In combat situations, we need to know exactly what our people can and cannot do." "I understand, sir," Ariana replied. "I've never intentionally deceived anyone about my capabilities." Phillips leaned back in his chair, his expression hard. "Whether intentional or not, the result is the same. You've created doubt about your trustworthiness and your suitability for military service." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ariana could see where this conversation was heading, could feel her dreams of military service crumbling under the weight of suspicions she couldn't adequately address. "Effective immediately," Phillips continued, "you're being placed on administrative review. Your training will be limited to basic duties while we conduct a full investigation into your background and capabilities. Any unauthorized training activities will result in immediate discharge." The restriction felt like being buried alive. Everything she'd worked for, all the preparation and sacrifice, was being stripped away because she'd been too competent for their expectations. "Sir, may I ask what I need to do to resolve this situation?" Ariana asked, though she suspected there was no good answer. Phillips returned to his desk and closed her file with finality.
You need to decide whether you want to be honest about your background and training, or whether you want to continue with the pretense that you're just a naturally gifted recruit who happens to know advanced combat techniques. The ultimatum was clear: confess to unauthorized training and face disciplinary action, or maintain her story and face ongoing suspicion. Either choice would effectively end her military career before it had truly begun. "I'll need time to consider my response, sir," Ariana said, knowing that time wouldn't change the fundamental impossibility of her situation. "You have 48 hours," Phillips replied. "After that, we'll proceed with whatever course of action seems appropriate based on the evidence we've compiled." Ariana left the office feeling like she was walking to her own execution. The training that was supposed to make her a better soldier had instead marked her as a security risk. Her preparation had become her downfall, and there seemed to be no way to fix it.
Tuesday, March 15th, began like any other day at Riverside Elementary. The sun streamed through the tall windows, casting familiar golden rectangles across the freshly waxed floors. Adele Mitchell arrived at 6:30 a.m., as she had every morning for 3 years, her cleaning cart loaded with supplies and her mind focused on maintaining the careful balance between competence and invisibility that her performance improvement plan demanded. She'd spent the past 2 weeks deliberately limiting her observations, forcing herself to notice only maintenance issues and ignore the security vulnerabilities that her trained eye automatically cataloged. It was like trying to see with one eye closed, but she'd managed to avoid any further complaints from parents or staff. The morning routine proceeded normally. Children arrived with their usual mix of excitement and sleepiness, teachers prepared their classrooms for another day of learning, and Adele moved through the building like a ghost, cleaning and organizing while staying carefully within her prescribed boundaries. At 10:47 a.m., she was restocking paper towels in the main hallway bathroom when she heard the first sound that made her blood freeze. The distinctive crack of the gymnasium's rear door lock finally giving way completely. Through the thin bathroom wall, she could hear voices, adult male voices, speaking in urgent, clipped tones that her tactical training immediately identified as operational communication. These weren't maintenance workers or delivery personnel. These were individuals moving with purpose and coordination through an entry point that she'd reported as vulnerable 5 times over the past 4 months. Adele's mind shifted instantaneously from custodial concerns to threat assessment. The voices were too distant to make out specific words, but their tone and rhythm suggested multiple individuals coordinating movement through the building. Her heart rate elevated as she realized that her worst-case scenarios might be unfolding in real time. She moved silently to the bathroom door and opened it a crack, using the mirror placement to get a limited view down the hallway toward the gymnasium wing. What she saw confirmed her fears. 5 figures in dark clothing and ski masks moving with military-style coordination through the corridor, carrying what appeared to be assault rifles. The performance improvement plan, Harrison's warnings about staying within her boundaries, the community's suspicions about her behavior, all of it evaporated in the face of immediate lethal threat to 30 children and adults who had no idea what was happening. Adele's tactical training took over with the smooth efficiency of muscle memory. She assessed the intruder's movement pattern, estimated their timeline for reaching the main classroom areas, and calculated response options based on the building layout she'd memorized obsessively over 3 years. The gunmen were approximately 2 minutes from the primary classroom wing if they maintained their current pace. The main office was in the opposite direction, meaning Principal Harrison and the administrative staff were temporarily safer, but also unable to coordinate an immediate response. Most critically, the children in the classrooms had no warning and no preparation for this level of threat.
Adele reached for her radio to contact the main office, then remembered that custodial staff weren't included in the emergency communication system. Her radio only connected to maintenance frequencies that weren't monitored during school hours. She had perhaps 90 seconds before the gunman reached Mrs. Patterson's third-grade classroom, where 38-year-old children were probably working on their morning math assignments, completely unaware that their lives had just been placed in immediate danger. Every protocol, every boundary, every limitation that had been imposed on her over the past 3 years crystallized into a single moment of choice. She could follow her performance improvement plan, alert the main office through proper channels, and watch helplessly as untrained staff tried to coordinate a response to a threat they'd never imagined. She could respect the community's judgment that she was unqualified for crisis situations and leave the children's safety to people who'd never seen combat. Or she could become, for the first time in 3 years, exactly who she'd been trained to be. Through the bathroom mirror, she watched the gunman reach the main hallway intersection. In 60 seconds, they would have visual contact with the classroom doors. In 90 seconds, they would be in position to control access to every child in the building. Adele Mitchell, the quiet custodian who exceeded boundaries and made parents uncomfortable with her surveillance behavior, stepped fully into the hallway and began moving toward the classroom wing with the fluid, purposeful stride of someone's job had once been saving lives in impossible situations. For the first time since Damascus, she was about to find out if she still remembered how. The crisis that everyone had dismissed as impossible was unfolding exactly as she'd prepared for. In a building whose vulnerabilities she'd documented obsessively, threatening children whose names and faces she'd memorized not as a suspicious custodian, but as a protector who understood that preparation was the difference between tragedy and survival. The gunman had 90 seconds to reach the children. Adele had 85 seconds to reach them first. The quiet custodian who'd been ordered to mind her own business was about to discover that sometimes protecting innocent lives was everyone's business.
The precious seconds after spotting the gunman, Adele's tactical training screamed a single priority: establish communication with potential allies and coordinate immediate protective action. Despite every warning about exceeding her boundaries, she knew that the next 60 seconds would determine whether 30 children lived or died. She sprinted toward the main office, her soft-soled shoes silent against the polished floors, her mind already calculating timing and positioning. The administrative staff had to be warned, evacuation procedures had to be initiated, and someone with authority had to make the critical decisions that could save lives. Adele burst through the main office door to find Principal Harrison reviewing paperwork at his desk while Linda Morrison sorted mail at the front counter. Both looked up in surprise at her dramatic entrance, their expressions shifting from confusion to irritation as they processed the sight of their problematic custodian violating yet another boundary. "Mitchell," Harrison began, his voice carrying the exasperated tone she'd grown accustomed to, "what are you—" "Sir, we have armed intruders in the building," Adele interrupted, her voice urgent but controlled. "5 men with assault rifles entering through the gymnasium rear exit. They're approximately 60 seconds from the primary classroom wing." The words hung in the air for a moment of stunned silence. Harrison's expression shifted from irritation to disbelief, while Morrison looked between them as if trying to process what she'd just heard. "Mitchell," Harrison said slowly, "what are you talking about?" "Armed intruders, sir. I observed them entering through the compromised lock on the gymnasium door, the one I've reported multiple times. They're moving in coordinated formation toward the classrooms. We need to initiate lockdown procedures immediately." Harrison's face flushed as he stood up from his desk. "Mitchell, this is exactly the kind of behavior that landed you on a performance improvement plan. You cannot continue to create crisis situations based on your overactive security concerns."
Adele felt precious seconds ticking away as she stared at Harrison's skeptical expression. "Sir, this is not a drill or a false alarm. I saw 5 armed men." "You saw maintenance workers or delivery personnel or any number of people who have legitimate reasons to be in this building. Your continued insistence on seeing threats where none exist is precisely why parents have raised concerns about your mental state." "Principal Harrison," Adele said, forcing her voice to remain calm despite the urgent terror building in her chest, "please listen to me. In approximately 40 seconds, those men will have visual contact with Mrs. Patterson's classroom. We need to address your inability to distinguish between reality and paranoid fantasy. Mitchell, you're clearly having some kind of episode. Linda, please call the district office and—" The sound that cut through Harrison's dismissal was unmistakable, the distinctive crack of automatic gunfire echoing through the building's corridors, followed immediately by children's screams. For a frozen moment, all 3 adults in the office stared at each other as the sound of terror reverberated through the walls. Harrison's face went white, Morrison dropped the mail she'd been sorting, and Adele felt the last vestiges of her civilian persona burn away in the face of confirmed lethal threat. "Lockdown procedures, now," Adele said, her voice transformed from pleading to commanding. "Initiate building-wide lockdown, contact emergency services, and coordinate with—" "Oh my God," Morrison whispered, reaching for the phone with shaking hands. "Oh my God, this is really happening." Harrison seemed paralyzed, his earlier certainty crumbling as more gunfire echoed through the building. The man who'd spent weeks lecturing Adele about exceeding her boundaries was now faced with a crisis that exceeded every boundary he'd ever imagined. "Sir," Adele pressed, "we need decisive action. Every second we delay increases casualties." We need to—" Harrison stammered, his administrative training failing him completely in the face of actual violence. "The protocols. Where are the emergency protocols?" More gunfire, closer now, followed by adult voices shouting instructions that Adele couldn't make out clearly. The sounds painted a terrifying picture. The gunmen had reached the classroom wing and were now controlling access to the children. "Linda, did you reach 911?" Adele asked, taking charge as Harrison continued to struggle with the reality of the situation. They're dispatching units," Morrison replied, her voice shaking. "But they said response time could be 8 to 10 minutes. 8 to 10 minutes. Adele knew from her tactical training that active shooter situations were typically resolved within 3 to 4 minutes, one way or another. The children didn't have 8 minutes to wait for outside help. "Sir," she said to Harrison, who was still staring blankly at his emergency protocol binder, "I need you to understand that we're the only immediate response available. The children's survival depends on actions taken in the next few minutes." Harrison looked up at her, his face pale and his hands trembling. What are we supposed to do? I'm not trained for this. None of us are trained for this." The admission hung in the air like an indictment. For months, Harrison had insisted that qualified professionals would handle any crisis situation. Now, faced with the crisis itself, those professionals were minutes away, while children were dying in real time. "I am trained for this," Adele said quietly, knowing that the next words would either save lives or end her civilian existence forever. "I can help them, but I need you to let me act outside my job description." Harrison stared at her, processing the implication of her words. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the custodian you've been ordering to mind her own business might be the only person in this building qualified to save those children. But I need you to officially authorize me to exceed my boundaries." Another burst of gunfire, followed by a teacher's voice shouting instructions to students. Time was running out, and Adele could see in Harrison's eyes the terrible understanding that his systematic dismissal of her capabilities had left everyone unprepared for the moment when those capabilities became essential. "Mitchell," he whispered, Who are you really? Adele looked toward the hallway where children were screaming, then back at the man who'd spent weeks ensuring she couldn't prepare for exactly this situation. I'm someone who's been trying to protect your students for 3 years, she said. The question is whether you're going to let me do it now when it actually matters. Harrison's next words would determine whether the children of Riverside Elementary would be saved by someone they'd systematically underestimated, or whether the cost of dismissing her expertise would be measured in small lives lost.
Principal Harrison stared at Adele Mitchell as another burst of gunfire echoed through the building, followed by the sound of splintering wood and children's terrified screams. His administrative training, his careful protocols, his months of dismissing her concerns, all of it had collapsed in the face of a crisis that demanded immediate action from someone, anyone, who knew what they were doing. "Mitchell," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "are you telling me you have experience with this kind of situation?" Adele felt the weight of 3 years of carefully constructed lies balanced against the lives of 30 children who were running out of time. In her previous life, revealing operational details would have been unthinkable. But her previous life had never included 8-year-olds hiding under desks while armed men decided their fate. "I have experience with tactical situations involving the protection of civilians in hostile environments," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I can help them, but every second we spend talking is a second those children don't have." Harrison looked at Linda Morrison, who was clutching the phone and staring at them both with wide, terrified eyes. Then he looked back at Adele, and she could see him wrestling with the impossible choice between authorizing actions that violated every policy he'd ever enforced and watching helplessly as his students died. "What would you need to do?" he asked. The question was authorization and abdication rolled into one. Adele understood that Harrison was asking her to take command of a situation he was completely unequipped to handle, while simultaneously preparing to blame her if anything went wrong. "I need access to the building's PA system to coordinate with teachers. I need you to provide whatever information you can about the gunman's location and movement, and I need you to keep emergency services updated on the situation as it develops. Most importantly, I need you to not interfere with my actions, even if they seem to exceed normal custodial duties." Harrison nodded shakily. "Yes, okay, whatever you need. Just please help them." Adele moved toward the PA system controls, her mind already shifting into the tactical mindset she'd suppressed for 3 years. As she reached for the microphone, she made a decision that would forever end her quiet civilian existence. "Attention all teaching staff," she said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to life and death situations. "This is Adele Mitchell. We have confirmed armed intruders in the building. Initiate immediate classroom lockdown procedures. Barricade doors, move children away from windows, and maintain absolute silence. Do not attempt to evacuate unless I give specific instructions. Acknowledge receipt of this message by classroom number." The responses came quickly. "Room 12, confirmed. Room 8, understood. Room 15, we're secure." But the response that made Adele's blood run cold came from Mrs. Patterson. "Room 6, we can't secure the door. The lock mechanism is broken, and we can hear them in the hallway outside. They're trying to get in." Room 6. 30 third graders, including Emma Rodriguez with her gap-toothed smile, and Tommy Chen, who always forgot his lunch money. The children she'd watched and protected from a distance for 3 years, now trapped in a room they couldn't secure, while armed men worked to reach them. Adele looked at Harrison, who was staring at the PA system with an expression of dawning horror. "How long until police arrive?" she asked. "Linda said 8 to 10 minutes, maybe 7 if they're already in the area."
7 minutes. The gunman would be through that broken door in less than 2. "Sir," Adele said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to propose, "I'm going to attempt to neutralize the threat before they can harm the children in room 6. I need you to coordinate with emergency services and maintain communication with the other classrooms." Harrison's eyes widened. "Neutralize? What do you mean, neutralize?" Adele was already moving toward the door, her mind calculating routes, timing, and tactical advantages. "I mean, I'm going to stop them from killing those children by whatever means necessary." "Mitchell, wait," Harrison called after her. "You can't. You're not qualified. This isn't your responsibility." Adele paused at the office door and looked back at the man who'd spent months telling her exactly those things. "Principal Harrison, with respect, you've been wrong about my qualifications for 3 years. Don't let being wrong about my responsibility cost those children their lives." She stepped into the hallway, leaving behind the safety of administrative protocol and civilian obscurity. For the first time since Damascus, she was about to engage in direct tactical action against armed hostiles. The difference was that this time she wasn't fighting to serve national interests or prevent international incidents. This time, she was fighting to save children whose names she knew, whose faces she'd memorized, whose trust she'd lost, but whose lives still mattered more than her own safety or reputation. Behind her, she could hear Harrison frantically coordinating with emergency services. "Yes, we have someone attempting to—" "I don't know what she's attempting. She says she's qualified. I don't know what that means. Just get here as fast as you can." Ahead of her, she could hear Mrs. Patterson's voice through the classroom door, trying to keep 30 terrified children calm while armed men worked systematically to break through their inadequate defenses. Adele Mitchell, the custodian who'd been ordered to mind her own business, moved down the hallway toward a confrontation that would prove definitively whether protecting innocent lives was everyone's business after all. The decision had been made. The quiet woman who cleaned floors and emptied trash bins was about to discover if she still remembered how to be the warrior she'd once been. The children in room 6 were about to find out whether their dismissed custodian was actually their salvation.
Moving through the familiar hallways with deadly purpose, Adele Mitchell felt her carefully constructed civilian persona dissolve completely. The soft-spoken custodian who'd spent 3 years apologizing for her competence was gone, replaced by the tactical operative who'd once moved through hostile environments with lethal efficiency. Her first stop was the maintenance office, where she retrieved items that her colleagues would have found incomprehensible in their mundane custodian's toolkit. From a locked drawer disguised among cleaning supply catalogs, she pulled out a detailed floor plan marked with tactical positions, sight lines, and defensive advantages that she'd mapped obsessively during her late-night security assessments. More importantly, she accessed the specialized tools she'd accumulated under the pretense of building maintenance. A heavy-duty wrench became an impact weapon. Industrial zip ties became restraining devices. A small container of concentrated ammonia from the chemistry lab supplies became an improvised chemical deterrent. Each item served dual purposes that no one had ever questioned because no one had imagined their custodian might need weapons. From her personal locker, she retrieved the tactical knife she'd kept hidden for 3 years, a violation of school policy that she justified as necessary for emergency situations exactly like this one. The familiar weight in her hand triggered muscle memory that made her movements more fluid, more purposeful. But her most valuable preparation had been the psychological conditioning she'd maintained through her late-night scenario planning. For months, she'd mentally rehearsed variations of this exact situation: armed intruders, children in immediate danger, law enforcement minutes away, and herself as the only immediate response available. The key difference between her scenarios and the current reality was that she'd always imagined having to overcome skepticism and resistance from staff members who didn't understand the threat. She'd never imagined that the crisis would be so severe that her authority would be accepted immediately out of sheer desperation. Moving toward the classroom wing, she used her comprehensive knowledge of the building's layout to approach from an angle the gunman wouldn't anticipate. Her custodial access had given her 3 years to study every corridor, every blind spot, every tactical advantage that the building's original architects had never intended. Through her earpiece, she could hear fragments of radio communication from the gunmen, professional terminology, and coordination that confirmed her worst fears about their level of training and preparation. These weren't random individuals acting impulsively. They were organized, disciplined, and following a predetermined plan. From her position near the science lab, she could see 2 of the gunmen positioned to control the main hallway, while their colleagues worked on breaching Mrs. Patterson's classroom door. Their positioning showed tactical awareness. They'd established security zones and communication protocols that suggested military or law enforcement background. This wasn't going to be a simple matter of surprising unprepared amateurs. These were trained operatives who'd planned their assault carefully and positioned themselves to maximize control while minimizing their own vulnerability. Adele's tactical assessment painted a sobering picture. 5 armed men with military-style coordination positioned to control access to the primary target area with established security zones and communication protocols. Against this, she had improvised weapons, detailed knowledge of the building's layout, and 3 years of pent-up determination to protect the children she'd been watching over in secret. The mathematical odds were terrible. The tactical situation was nearly impossible. But the children in room 6 were running out of time, and she was the only immediate response available. From her position, she could hear Mrs. Patterson's voice growing more strained as she tried to keep 30 terrified children quiet while the door they couldn't properly secure came under increasingly aggressive assault. The teacher was doing everything right according to standard lockdown procedures, but standard procedures hadn't been designed for this level of coordinated assault. Adele checked her improvised weapons one final time, reviewed her mental map of tactical positions and escape routes, and made the psychological transition that she'd hoped never to make again. The custodian who'd been ordered to stay within her boundaries was about to cross the ultimate boundary between civilian and combatant. But first, she needed to even the odds. Her knowledge of the building's systems extended beyond floor plans and security vulnerabilities. 3 years of maintenance work had given her intimate familiarity with electrical systems, ventilation controls, and emergency protocols that could be weaponized in ways the building's designers had never imagined. Moving silently to the main electrical panel, she made selective power cuts that would create darkness in strategic areas while maintaining illumination in zones where she needed visibility. Next, she accessed the building's fire suppression system, activating sprinklers in specific zones to create noise cover and visual obstruction. The water would also make floors slippery, potentially affecting the gunman's movement and positioning. Finally, she triggered a modified version of the building's emergency announcement system, creating audio distractions in areas away from Room 6 to potentially draw some of the gunmen away from their primary target. These preparations took 90 seconds, time that she couldn't afford but couldn't proceed without. When she was finished, the tactical environment had shifted in her favor, though the fundamental challenge remained unchanged. She was one person with improvised weapons facing 5 trained operatives with military-grade equipment. As she moved toward her first engagement position, Adele thought about the children whose lives depended on her. Not strategic assets or civilian casualties or statistical probabilities, but individual children whose names and faces she knew intimately. Emma Rodriguez, who needed help reaching the coat hooks.
Tommy Chen, who forgot his lunch money every Tuesday, Sarah Williams, who'd finally stopped limping from her playground injury. 30 faces that had smiled at her before their parents' suspicions had taught them to be wary. The quiet custodian who'd been dismissed as irrelevant was about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. But first, she had to survive the next 10 minutes and keep 30 children alive in the process. The preparation was complete. The engagement was about to begin.
The improvised flashbang device detonated exactly as Adele had calculated, creating a brilliant white light and deafening noise that sent the 3 gunmen stumbling backward while the children instinctively covered their eyes and ears. In the precious seconds of confusion that followed, Adele Mitchell transformed from dismissed custodian to lethal protector with the fluid efficiency of someone returning to their true nature. The first gunman, disoriented by the blast, never saw her coming. Her tactical knife found its mark with surgical precision, and he dropped silently to the classroom floor. The second gunman, trying to reorient himself in the chaos, turned directly into the industrial wrench that caught him across the temple with calculated force. He collapsed unconscious beside his partner. The third gunman, demonstrating the training that had made this operation possible, managed to raise his weapon despite the disorientation. But 3 years of studying this building's every detail gave Adele an advantage he couldn't anticipate. She rolled behind Mrs. Patterson's desk just as automatic fire shredded the air where she'd been standing, then emerged from an angle he hadn't expected, using the classroom's layout against him. The engagement lasted less than 10 seconds from the moment she dropped through the ceiling. When it was over, 3 of the 5 gunmen were neutralized, and the immediate threat to room 6 had been eliminated. But the sound of gunfire had alerted their colleagues in the hallway, and Adele could hear urgent radio chatter as the remaining 2 gunmen attempted to coordinate their response to a threat they hadn't planned for. "Mrs. Patterson," Adele said quietly, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to crisis situations. "Keep the children exactly where they are. Don't let them look at what's happened here, and don't let them move until I give the all clear." The teacher, staring at Adele with a mixture of shock and dawning recognition, nodded silently. Around them, 30 children huddled together, most still covering their ears from the flashbang's effects, unaware that their quiet custodian had just saved their lives. "Emma, Tommy, Sarah," Adele called softly, to the 3 children who'd been specifically targeted. "You're safe now. Nobody's going to take you anywhere." Moving to the broken classroom door, Adele could see the 2 remaining gunmen taking defensive positions in the main hallway. Their tactical coordination was breaking down as they struggled to adapt to the complete failure of their operational plan. What should have been a quick extraction operation had become a defensive standoff against an adversary they hadn't anticipated. Using her commandeered radio, she could hear their increasingly desperate communication with their command structure. "Extraction compromised. Unknown hostile has neutralized 3 team members, requesting immediate backup and revised extraction protocol." The response was telling. "Negative on backup. Mission is compromised. Execute emergency withdrawal immediately." Adele understood that the remaining gunmen would now be focused on escape rather than completing their abduction mission. But their withdrawal route would take them past other classrooms filled with children, and desperate criminals were often more dangerous than methodical ones. She keyed the PA system using her custodial access codes. "All teaching staff, this is Adele Mitchell. The immediate threat to room 6 has been neutralized. 2 hostiles remain in the building, are attempting to withdraw through the main corridor. Maintain lockdown positions until further notice. Law enforcement is en route." As she spoke, she moved through the service corridors with the same invisible efficiency she'd used for 3 years of maintenance work. But now, instead of replacing light bulbs or checking heating systems, she was tracking armed men through a building where she knew every sightline, every hiding place, every tactical advantage.
The remaining gunmen, professional as they were, had prepared for law enforcement response and coordinated resistance personnel. They hadn't prepared for pursuit by someone who knew the building better than they knew their own equipment, someone who could move through spaces that didn't appear on any blueprint they might have studied. The final confrontation occurred near the gymnasium's rear exit, the same compromised door that Adele had reported as a security vulnerability 5 times over the past 4 months. The poetic justice wasn't lost on her as she positioned herself to intercept the gunmen at the very location where their operation had begun. When Riverside Elementary's first police units arrived 6 minutes later, they found 2 unconscious gunmen secured with industrial zip ties near the gymnasium exit, 3 neutralized operatives in room 6, and 30 children safe under the protection of their teacher and a custodian who'd just proven that expertise couldn't be measured by job descriptions. Principal Harrison, emerging from the main office where he'd coordinated with emergency services, stared at Adele Mitchell as if seeing her for the first time. The quiet woman who'd been placed on a performance improvement plan for exceeding her boundaries had just exceeded them in ways that saved 30 lives. "Mitchell," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "who are you really?" Adele looked at the children filing safely out of room 6, at Emma Rodriguez reaching up to hug her legs, at Tommy Chen, whose lunch money would never seem like an important problem again, at Sarah Williams, whose smile showed no trace of fear despite everything she'd just witnessed. "I'm someone who thinks protecting children is everyone's job, regardless of what their job description says." As emergency medical personnel checked the children for injuries and FBI agents began processing the crime scene, word of what had happened spread through the community with the speed of profound disbelief. The custodian they'd dismissed as potentially dangerous had turned out to be the only thing standing between their children and a tragedy that would have destroyed families and haunted the community forever. The investigation that followed revealed the scope of what Adele had prevented. The gunmen were part of an international trafficking operation that had specifically targeted children from military families. Emma's father was deployed overseas, Tommy's mother was a Navy logistics officer, and Sarah's parents both worked in defense contracting. The abduction had been planned for months, with detailed intelligence about the children's schedules, the school's security weaknesses, and law enforcement response times. But the traffickers hadn't counted on a French counter-terrorist specialist hiding behind a custodian's uniform, spending 3 years preparing for exactly this kind of scenario while being systematically dismissed as irrelevant by the community she was protecting. 6 months later, Adele Mitchell stood in the same hallway where she'd once pushed a cleaning cart in invisible obscurity. But everything had changed. The security improvements she'd recommended were finally implemented. The staff treated her with the respect due someone whose expertise had been proven under the most extreme circumstances. Most importantly, the children looked at her with the easy trust of people who knew without question that she would always protect them. Emma Rodriguez still needed help reaching the coat hooks, but now she asked for it with the confidence of someone who knew that Miss Adele could reach anything, fix anything, protect anyone who needed protecting. Tommy Chen still forgot his lunch money, but Mrs. Patterson had stopped worrying about whether he'd remember because she knew that Miss Adele would make sure no child in her school ever go without what they needed. The guardian, whom Mr. Harrison had almost fired for exceeding her boundaries, had become the guardian angel they never knew they needed. And Adele Mitchell, for the first time in 3 years, was finally able to sleep peacefully, knowing that the children under her protection were truly safe. Sometimes the most important qualifications can't be found on a resume. Sometimes the most valuable expertise comes from people who've learned to hide their capabilities behind humble service. And sometimes the person everyone dismisses as irrelevant turns out to be the only one who was truly paying attention to what mattered most. The quiet custodian had found her place not by accepting limitations, but by proving that when innocent lives are at stake, there are no boundaries that matter more than the willingness to cross any line necessary to keep children safe. The story of Adele Mitchell would be told for years at Riverside Elementary, not as a cautionary tale about exceeding boundaries, but as proof that sometimes the most ordinary-looking people are capable of the most extraordinary things when the situation demands it. And in a world where threats could come from anywhere at any time, the community had learned the value of having someone watching over them who'd spent her entire career learning how to turn the impossible into the inevitable, one quiet act of protection at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.